all the myths about Iran were nonsense. Iran is corrupt, it is falling apart, it is a dictatorship, it is, imploding, morally bankrupt, evil, the regime is unpopular everywhere. All of these myths that we've been hearing for decades have been destroyed. I had no doubt that we would win the war from day one. But I know that almost all the people who I know abroad, friends of Iran, in the West or in Russia or in China, they thought Iran would collapse within a couple of days or capitulate in a few days. It was clear to me that Iran would win. They're hurting themselves, and they'll continue to do so because I don't think that the Americans will learn. Mm-hmm. At least not this regime. And I don't mean the Trump regime, I mean the political establishment that rules the United States, the Epstein class, the oligarchy, the Zionists, they won't learn.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Christopher Hawley here for DD Geopolitics, and I'm joined by Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. It's always a pleasure to have him on the program, and we're so honored to be here in Tehran with you. Finally together in Iran. It's a real honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I want to first ask you, we saw videos, you were at the funeral as well throughout the entire process with some of our friends. We saw you with Max Blumenthal, with Jackson, with many others. And I want to ask you personally, what did these days mean for you? And what do you think, if you could expand that, what do you think it meant for the Iranian people and the Iranian nation to have this final send-off for Imam Khamenei and his family?
Well, there are many things that can be said. It would take a long time to go through everything. But I think his personality aside and the relationship that he had with the people became evident through the enormous crowds. They were so huge that for the first time, the West couldn't hide it, nor could the Arab regimes, these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf with their huge financial resources and their media empires. They even tried to hide the size of General Soleimani's funeral and the President Raisi's funeral. But this was so enormous that even they couldn't hide that. And that just shows the feelings, the extent of the feelings and the depth of the feelings of Iranians towards Ayatollah Khamenei. He was a very courageous person. He'd gone to jail multiple times during the Shah. He volunteered to fight in the war, even though he had no military experience. At the beginning of the war, when Saddam invaded during those very dark times, dark days, he went and fought as a volunteer. He was later assassinated. During the final months of the war, when the Americans joined Saddam against Iran, he again left Tehran and went to the war front as the president, which was a very dangerous thing to do. So he was that sort of person. His children fought as volunteers in the war, the older children who were of age, including Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. He was fluent in 4 languages, a man of literature, very well versed in Persian literature and Arabic literature and Azeri literature. The greatest Azeri poet of all time, Shahryar, was his very close friend. He was a very eloquent speaker. He was well versed in philosophy and intellectual traditions and history. He was very polite. You never see him using insulting language. You would never see him answer his political opponents in an insulting way. In Iran, he was criticized a lot. And one of the things that they criticized him about was Iran's military policy. The drone program, the missile program, and the underground bases. Politicians in Iran would criticize him, but he would never respond. Sometimes they would insult him, but he would never respond by insulting any individual. He would never name people. And he turned out to be right. In fact, one of the senior reformists came on television during the war, to his credit, and said, look, if we were in charge, this country would have collapsed. Because what saved the country was Ayatollah Khamenei's military strategy. This whole military strategy that has been created was brought about through 3 decades of work without actually having spent a lot of money. The Iranian military budget was less than other countries in this region, but it was well spent and carefully spent. And so I think his military doctrine will be studied in military universities for decades to come. And of course, the axis of resistance and this broad alliance across the region. So he always supported the oppressed. We have had different administrations in power in Iran, but he was always stressing on each administration not to allow the disenfranchised to be left behind, not to allow the vulnerable classes to be ignored. He wasn't opposed to the private sector, but he was very insistent on social justice. And as I said, we've had different administrations, some liberal, some conservative, some leftist, somewhat. But in all instances, he would stress on supporting the vulnerable. And that was his policy across the world. Whether it was Cuba or South Africa, as president, he went to the frontline countries in Southern Africa to support the resistance against apartheid, and of course Palestine, we all know. So he was loved by people in a way in which we've never seen on this planet, through the funerals and the expressions of their emotions and their determination to participate in the summer heat with all the difficulties that people have. You know, we're under siege, we have sanctions, they've destroyed factories, a lot of people have lost their jobs, or inflation is high, but you see that they were determined to take part in this. So that aside, I think because the Western leaders don't comprehend human relations and emotions, they are the Epstein class. What is important for them is that all the myths about Iran were nonsense. Iran is corrupt, it is falling apart, it is a dictatorship, it is imploding, morally bankrupt, evil, the regime is unpopular everywhere. All of these myths that we've been hearing for decades have been destroyed. Not that they won't go back to these myths. They'll wait a few months, a few weeks, and then start all over again. Even now, if you look at the New York Times, you'll see Iran unstable, infighting, and that sort of nonsense. But what is important is that they do recognize that Iran is not just militarily powerful, but inside the country is united. And the overwhelming majority of people in Iran support the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's what polls have always said. And that's what their own polls say. The State Department, the CIA, they carry out lots of polling in Iran from Turkey. They have polling centers there that call Iran, and they do telephone. So they know what the sentiments of Iranians are. But still, this is a sort of reality that hits in a different way. It is going to have a major impact on the way in which Iran deals with its adversaries, and I think it's going to make them calculate more carefully when they deal with us.
I wanted to ask you, we've been seeing a lot of messaging over the past months, and now with the funeral, there's been sort of a meltdown by the diaspora and some elements of the diaspora and the opposition. And I wanted to ask you, since you are a professor of Orientalism, do you think that for Iranians, some Iranians in the diaspora, there is a type of self-Orientalism, there is a type of trying to, seeing themselves in the same way as the propaganda and sort of the stereotypes and caricatures see them or portray them, and then they try to somehow be even more radical and more European or more American than the Europeans and the Americans. And in this way, they become the most ardent, I would say, revisionists and with a profound hatred for the country as it is.
Well, first of all, most of the Iranian diaspora is not like that.
Correct, yeah.
And I've been invited to different places, and I was invited by UCI, University of California,
Irvine. Yep.
And I spent a few days when I was there in Southern California and in the neighborhoods of the Iranians. I didn't see any hostility towards me. Some people recognized me. I wasn't as well known, perhaps, as now, but I had not experienced any hostility. And in the UK, back in the day when I used to go, I've been to Iranian neighborhoods. They know who I am. I have not experienced any hostility. So, all that aside, these people are Orientalized Orientals. They are, they're like what Malcolm X would call the house slave.
Yeah.
Or the brown sahib, who tries to be as close to the sahib as possible, as close to the master as possible. The comprador class. So these people, they are irredeemable for the most part, but they exist, and the West depends on them, because the Western elites. I'm not talking about the people. Western elites, the Western media, they need them because they reinforce their narratives on Iran. So because they bring this authenticity, even though there's no authenticity in what they say. But because they're like supposedly Iranian, some of them don't even speak proper Persian. Some of them have never been to Iran. But they bring about, or they left Iran like when they're like 1 year old or an infant. So they have no real authenticity, but Western media uses them. So if you sometimes watch, they say we Iranians are like this, but this person has never been to Iran. And so yeah, these people, they try to be more American than ordinary Americans often, or more German than the Germans, for their own sake, to feel they even change their names to something more
palatable.
Yeah, something more. Or they won't say they're Iranian, they will say they're Persian. But they're irrelevant. And the West only hurts itself by counting on their narratives, on their information, their knowledge, because the U.S. policy is formulated through these false narratives, and then every time they implement policy, they hit a brick wall. And I mean, I had no doubt that we would win the war from day one, but I know that almost all the people who I know abroad, friends of Iran, in the West or in Russia or in China, they thought Iran would collapse within a couple of days or capitulate in a few days. It was clear to me that Iran would win, both during the 12-day war, and anyone who goes back and takes a look at my interviews back then, it was clear that, I mean, I was saying that back then. There was no doubt that we would win. We would defeat the aggressor. But these people, they thought we would collapse based upon the narrative that they have been reinforcing for 47 years. So since Iran is corrupt and imploding, it's a house of cards. So all you have to do is just give it a push and it falls. After the 12-day war, they should have learned. But they didn't. They said, well, next time we'll bring in the Americans and everything they have, and which is far greater than what anything that the Israeli regime has. And then they'd fall with this broad coalition, these regimes in the Persian Gulf, NATO helping them and all that. And even Turkey and the Republic of Azerbaijan not being very friendly and helping the Americans in their own way, and the Israelis, they failed. And it's because, for me, it was clear that they'd fail, just like they're failing now. But because they depend on these so-called Iranians and upon narratives that existed before these Iranians. I mean, it's Orientalists also. But they're hurting themselves, and they'll continue to do so, because I don't think that the Americans will learn. At least not this regime. And I don't mean the Trump regime. I mean the political establishment that rules the United States. The Epstein class, the oligarchy, the Zionists. They won't learn.
One of the things that in Russia has been very evident for I think people watching Iran has been all the people who volunteered to defend the country. Even President Putin, when I was at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, he openly said this was confirmation of the strength of Iran, and that he was also very surprised that so many would come out, and that this was the strength of Iran, that nearly 40 plus million, I mean almost half the country, has just put their name on a paper. Maybe others didn't even have a chance to go to the office to put their name on the paper. So clearly there is a wellspring of support and love and patriotism. In your analysis,
so many people who wanted to participate and couldn't go. I mean, it's a big country.
Of course,
and
of course.
In Tehran, as you know, many people are at work. They're in hospitals. They're in the electrical power plants.
Yes, absolutely.
They're running. The country. The city has to be alive, so they can't leave their jobs. Or old people. My parents, my in-laws, my children. People with small children. They didn't take their little kids. So and then despite all that, you had this enormous presence that lasted from on the main funeral day, from 4 a.m. till 8-9 p.m. Where else in the world can you find such a gathering? It's not
nowhere.
Nothing even similar to it exists. So I would say with great confidence that when we speak about popular legitimacy, the Islamic Republic is more legitimate than any Western government. When we speak about the depth of the legitimacy and popular legitimacy, it's even, the gap is even greater. So when they speak about the Iranian regime, if we do a comparative study, they're the regimes, not the Iran, not Iran.
Do you think that comes from, do you think that there's a combination here between sort of deep faith, Shia Islam, this aspect, you always post we are the nation of Imam Hussein and that whole history from Karbala to present, Or do you believe that there's also a sort of Iranian nationalism, patriotism, or is it a combination and synthesis of multiple reasons why people are so patriotic?
There's no separation between Iranian nationalism and Islam. The biggest national event every year is Ashura. I mean, if you come to Iran and you visit Iran during any day of the year, you'll see that on a particular day it's different. And that is Ashura. People, their homes, they'll have, they'll have ceremonies in neighborhoods and houses, and there'll be public expressions. So there's no gap between Iranian views towards Iran, towards their country, and towards Islam. If I say I'm Iranian, I'm implying that I'm saying I'm Iranian, I'm Muslim, I'm mostly Shia, 90% or so. But our interpretation of Islam, the Shia interpretation of the Prophet and his household, his daughter, his son, his grandchildren, stresses on justice. And for us, justice is top priority. And that is why in Cuba, it's a communist state. We support them because they're the victim of injustice. Venezuela, with their own model, regardless of the current situation, we support them. I mean, even now in time of war, we're under siege, we're blockaded, we're being killed, they destroy infrastructure, our factories, the Americans and the Israelis. We sent aid to Venezuela. And who does that? Who else would do? I mean, no one else would do such a thing. We have our own problems at home. South Africa, and of course the Palestinians. Even though the Arab regimes in the region and the Persian language media broadcast from the West have always tried to create a divide between us and the Palestinians. The Arab regimes would tell the people that these are Shia, they're Persians, they're your enemy. I mean, there are Palestinians who I know of who hate Iran. And, or I don't know about now, but until recently, at least until a couple of years ago. And because they believe the propaganda, the sectarian propaganda, the racist propaganda. But Iran would not, and then the Persian media would show their statements and their online their online posts or their speeches about Iran, about the Shia, and say this is who you're defending to the Iranian people. So the Qataris and the Saudis and the Emiratis, because they all have huge media empires and they have a lot of religious and centers across the region and across the world. Their job has always been to create hatred towards Iran. After all, you have to keep in mind that Qatar is a Wahhabi regime. The official ideology is Wahhabism, so they're very takfiri in their ideology. So, but the Iranians would, they would refuse to change their position. See, Palestinians are victims. If they're misled, misguided about us, some of them, about who we are, if they're lied to about us, they're still victims. So the Iranians would not stop supporting them during all these years. So a lot of work has been done by the Arabic media, controlled by the empire, and sadly Erdogan has been a part of this too. I mean, Turkey is culturally speaking, it's very close to Iran, but Erdogan has pushed the country in a very bad direction, sadly. I mean, the Islamic movement in Turkey, the father of the movement, Najmuddin Erbakan, they sidelined him. But if he was in power, the situation for the Israeli regime would have been far different. He was a truly a true supporter of the Palestinian cause, a great man, and that's why the Turkish intelligence and Western intelligence and the deep state removed him and then brought up, and allowed Erdogan and these people to come to power instead. And of course, we see that Erdogan, how he works. He's been working in. Trump says he's more obedient to me than my European partners. Which says a lot. He also in Egypt, he said that it's really sad, but he said that because I love Turkey, and I have a lot of friends in Turkey. Trump also said once of him that he was always there for me when I needed him. So this genocidal monster is praising. But in any case, the point is that I'm optimistic, by the way, about the future. I'm very optimistic because people have woken up. And people are waking up to the reality across our region and across the world about Israel. And when I criticize regimes and countries, I'm not criticizing ordinary people.
Of course.
Turkey is one of the countries where almost universally people despise the Israeli regime, ordinary people. The same is true. I mean, when Iran I digress from the topic, but when Iran was striking these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, people across the Arab world were cheering. It was only the Takfiris, the Salafi and the Wahhabis who paid for by these regimes in the Persian Gulf that were upset. Ordinary people knew what these regimes stood for. But in any case, for us, justice is paramount. And so our support for the Palestinian people, despite the enormous attempts to create a wedge between Palestine and Iran, never stopped, never slowed down. There was never a moment, even when Hamas made the bad political decision to support the USA dirty war in Syria, Iran didn't stop supporting Hamas, the military wing of Hamas, for a minute. And the military wing of Hamas was, by the way, took a different stance from the political wing. And the political wing later changed. And although right now there are attempts to drag it back into there are debates taking place in the political wing right now in Hamas. But in any case, Iran's support for the Palestinian people was based upon this sense of justice. I've spoken too much, so anyway.
I wanted to ask you as a final question. Many people are wondering about the future, obviously, and we're still in a period of confrontation with the United States and with the Zionist regime. Do you think that Iran in the future could create maybe a security architecture with other anti-imperialist or global South countries? I'm thinking here of Russia or China or maybe other states that are also very hostile to imperialism and Zionism, at least imperialism, maybe not Zionism per se, except if you're thinking of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the same way as Iran feels. But do you think that there's some way that Iran could have a sort of new sort of alliance system that would be sort of a NATO-Warsaw Pact type of scenario that could create a block that could stop the hostility, or at least stave off the hostility? Or is Iran prepared to basically go at it alone and continue to have this sort of fourth superpower status with the Strait of Hormuz and continue on as it is?
I don't think Iran would ever think about some sort of alternative to NATO. Iran has very good relations with Russia. It has very good relations with China. With Russia, the cooperation is close. The two sides are hoping to expand the relationship through creating a north-south transport corridor, which is moving forward even despite the war. But Iran would like countries in the region to evolve and to tilt away from the United States. Iran is a powerful country, and its power is not so much because of it doesn't have the size of Russia or the population of China, but the ideology that exists in Iran gives it extraordinary power. It is basically because of our Shia faith that we have been able to resist and to maintain our principles despite the pressure. Of course, Iranian civilization goes back thousands of years. That is a part of it. But Iran will be steadfast, and it will not bow down to any power. And it shocked everyone. The Russians were shocked. The Chinese were shocked. We weren't shocked. Maybe some in Iran were shocked, but many of us were not. We did better than I expected, but I did not expect Iran to not to succeed. So our relations with countries across the global majority will expand, BRICS nations. Our relations with China and Russia will improve with neighbors who want to have better relations with us. Those relations will improve, but our hope is that the people in our part of the world will begin to put pressure on governments to change their position on Palestine, on U.S. domination. I mean, it's ironic that Turkey is investing so much in NATO, and then the Secretary General of NATO, when asked about whether NATO will protect Turkey if Israel attacks, he refuses to answer. Or when the U.S. ambassador says that if Israel takes the entire region, that they'll support, that he's fine with it. That's Syria, that's Lebanon, that's parts of Turkey, that's Iraq, that's Saudi Arabia, that's Egypt. It's not Iran. It's not Yemen. But it seems that the only two entities that care are Iran and Yemen, and of course the resistance in Iraq and Lebanon. What we hope to see is that people wake up to be resilient, to show resistance against the empire and against Zionism, and then I think we will be living in a much better environment.
Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, it was an absolute pleasure, as always. Thank you for your words, and look forward to seeing you again in Tehran soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.